The Gravins were not born to fear, they were born to rule. Their skin, a dark obsidian hue that reflected no light, was as impervious as their resolve. They towered over most species in the galaxy, their elongated limbs capable of snapping a lesser creature in two. They moved with precision, their movements sharp and unyielding, like the blades they wielded in ritual combat. For centuries, they had been the arbiters of power, the undisputed apex predators of the known universe. Their conquest of worlds was swift and methodical, each campaign a calculated display of dominance. The Gravins did not simply conquer, they dismantled civilizations, leaving no trace of defiance in their wake. Their leader, High Commander Vrashtal, sat in the shadowed chamber of the flagship Dominion's Claw, reviewing the latest intelligence. His eyes, sharp and luminous like twin yellow suns, scanned the holographic projection of a small, unremarkable planet on the outer rim of the galaxy, Earth. The humans, as they were called, were nothing more than an afterthought in the grand theater of Gravin expansion. Primitive, fractious, and fragile. Their wars were petty squabbles compared to the galactic battles Vrashtal had orchestrated. This planet would be yet another footnote in the annals of Gravin history. "The reconnaissance report, Commander," said Ozak, Vrashtal's second-in-command, bowing slightly as he entered the chamber. His voice carried a blend of deference and anticipation. Like all Gravins, Ozak thrived on conquest, and the prospect of a new campaign invigorated him. "Spare me the details," Vrashtal said, his tone clipped. "Is there any reason to consider them a threat?" "None," Ozak replied with a sneer. "Their technology is rudimentary, their species divided. They lack the coordination or resources to mount any meaningful resistance. By all accounts, they are ripe for subjugation." Vrashtal nodded, satisfied. He leaned back in his chair, the talons of his gauntlet hand tapping rhythmically on the armrest. Another simple conquest. Another victory for the Gravins. Yet, in the back of his mind, a faint unease stirred. Not fear, Vrashtal did not know fear, but an irritation born of countless campaigns. Even the simplest of victories required effort, and the effort was beginning to wear on him. The first strike came days later. The Gravins' fleet descended upon Earth like a swarm of locusts, blotting out the sky with their massive ships. Cities fell in hours, their once vibrant streets reduced to rubble beneath the Gravins' relentless advance. Resistance was minimal at first, as humans scattered like insects, their primitive weapons proving ineffective against the Gravins' advanced technology. But something was different about this campaign. The humans did not surrender as other species had. Where others cowered, humans retaliated. Where others fled, humans regrouped. Their resistance was chaotic, disorganized, yet infuriatingly persistent. Every time the Gravins believed they had crushed the last vestige of defiance, another pocket of resistance would spring up, fueled by desperation and a refusal to submit. It was during one such skirmish that Vrashtal encountered the first human who truly intrigued him. A woman, battered and bloodied, stood defiantly before a group of Gravin soldiers, her eyes burning with an intensity Vrashtal had never seen in a prey species. She carried a makeshift weapon, a crude amalgamation of metal pipes and scavenged parts. She was no warrior by Gravin standards, yet she fought with a ferocity that belied her fragile frame. Vrashtal watched from a distance, his curiosity piqued. The woman shouted something in her guttural tongue, and the humans around her rallied, launching a coordinated attack that overwhelmed the Gravin patrol. Vrashtal frowned. It wasn't the loss of a few soldiers that bothered him, it was the realization that humans could inspire such unity in the face of overwhelming odds. "Commander," Ozak said, stepping to his side, "the resistance in this sector has been neutralized. Shall we proceed to the next?" "Not yet," Vrashtal replied, his gaze fixed on the battlefield below. "There is something unusual about these humans." "Unusual?" Ozak echoed, his tone incredulous. "They are weak and scattered. Their resilience is nothing more than desperation." "Perhaps," Vrashtal mused, his voice thoughtful. "Or perhaps it is something more. I want this sector monitored closely. I want to understand what drives them." As the days turned into weeks, the Gravins continued their assault, but the humans' resistance only grew stronger. They adapted with alarming speed, turning the rubble of their cities into fortresses, their ingenuity transforming everyday objects into weapons of surprising effectiveness. Each skirmish brought new challenges, new tactics that the Grarvins had not anticipated. Vrashtal began to see patterns in the chaos. Humans were unpredictable, their strategies unconventional and their determination unyielding. They did not fight for survival alone. They fought for each other, for something intangible and powerful. It was a concept alien to the Grarvins, whose own society valued strength and dominance above all else. In the shadowed chamber of the Dominion's Claw, Vrashtal studied the reports with growing unease. The humans had begun to shift the balance of power in small but significant ways. They were far from victorious, yet their defiance was eroding the Grarvins' confidence, sowing doubt where none had existed before. "They are nothing more than insects," Ozak said, his frustration evident. "We should crush them completely, burn their cities to ash, and end this charade." "No," Vrashtal said sharply. "They are not insects. They are something else. Something we do not yet understand." Ozak stared at him, uncomprehending. "What could they possibly be, Commander?" "They are nothing compared to us." Vrashtal did not answer immediately. His mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of what he had observed. The humans were not stronger, not smarter, not more advanced. Yet they were something the Grarvins had never faced before. "They are unexpected," he said at last, the word feeling strange on his tongue. "And that makes them dangerous." For the first time in his long career, Vrashtal felt the faintest flicker of something unfamiliar. It wasn't fear, not yet. But it was close. Smoke curled into the evening sky, a grim signal of Earth's battered cities. Amid the chaos, Captain Elena Voss moved with purpose through the labyrinth of crumbling buildings, her breath steady despite the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. The air smelled of ash and ozone, and the distant hum of Grarvin patrol ships sent a shiver down her spine. Her squad trailed behind her, a ragged band of survivors turned soldiers, their faces etched with determination and fear. They were humanity's last line of defense in this sector, and they all knew it. Elena clenched her jaw, gripping the battered comm device in her hand. The signal was weak, static crackling intermittently, but she caught enough of the transmission to understand the grim reality. The Grarvins were advancing again, this time with greater force. They were adapting, just as humanity was, and their unrelenting pursuit left no room for error. "Status report," Elena barked, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "North perimeter's holding, barely," came the reply from Lieutenant Harrow, a wiry man with a knack for improvisation. He adjusted his scavenged rifle, its barrel patched with duct tape and hope. "But the drones are relentless. We'll need another distraction if we want to keep their eyes off the evac route." Elena nodded, her mind already racing. Distractions had become their primary weapon, improvised explosions, decoy movements, anything to scatter the Grarvins' attention and buy time. Time was humanity's most precious resource, and it was running out. "We'll make it work," she said, though the words tasted bitter. She didn't know how much longer they could hold out. Each battle felt like a delaying tactic in a war they couldn't win. A distant rumble interrupted her thoughts, and her squad instinctively dropped to the ground, their weapons trained on the horizon. A Grarvin war machine emerged from the smoke, its sleek, black frame glinting menacingly in the dim light. It moved with a mechanical grace, its weaponized appendages humming with latent energy. Behind it marched a platoon of Grarvin soldiers, their synchronized steps a chilling reminder of their efficiency. Elena's heart pounded, but she forced herself to focus. She turned to Harrow, gesturing toward the adjacent ruins. "Take Phillips and set up the charges. We'll draw their attention here. Go." Harrow nodded and signaled to Phillips, a hulking man with a talent for explosives. The two disappeared into the shadows, leaving Elena with the remaining 3 members of her squad. She surveyed their faces, saw the fear in their eyes, but also the flicker of resolve that had kept them alive this long. "This is it," she said, keeping her voice steady. "We hit them hard, we buy time for the evac. Stay sharp. Stay alive." The squad dispersed into position, and Elena took cover behind a shattered wall, her makeshift rifle resting on the jagged edge. She watched the Grarvin war machine advance, its sensors sweeping the terrain with cold precision. The soldiers moved like shadows, their obsidian armor blending with the smoke and rubble. They were perfect predators, but even predators could bleed. The first explosion ripped through the air, a deafening roar that sent a plume of debris skyward. The war machine staggered, its sensors momentarily blinded. Elena seized the moment, firing a barrage of projectiles at the advancing soldiers. Her squad joined in, their weapons barking defiantly against the overwhelming odds. The Garvans recovered quickly, their formation shifting with unnerving precision. They returned fire, energy blasts slicing through the ruins with lethal accuracy. One of Elena's squad members went down, a sharp cry cutting through the cacophony. She bit back the urge to scream, forcing herself to focus. There was no time for grief, no space for hesitation. The battle raged on, a chaotic dance of survival. Elena's squad moved like ghosts through the ruins, their knowledge of the terrain giving them a fleeting advantage. Harrow's charges detonated in sequence, creating a web of destruction that slowed the Garvans' advance. But it wasn't enough. The war machine, though damaged, continued its relentless march, its weapons locking onto their positions with terrifying precision. Elena gritted her teeth, her mind racing for options. Then she saw it, a structural weakness in the machine's chassis, exposed by one of the explosions. It was a small window of opportunity, but it was all she needed. "Cover me," she shouted, breaking from cover and sprinting toward the machine. Energy blasts scorched the air around her as her squad opened fire, drawing the Garvans' attention. She reached the base of the machine, her hands fumbling with the last remaining explosive in her pack. Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity as she affixed the charge to the exposed joint. She set the timer and turned to run, but a sudden force knocked her to the ground. A Garvan soldier loomed over her, its eyes blazing with cold fury. It raised its weapon, and Elena braced herself, knowing there was no escape. A shot rang out, and the Garvan soldier crumpled, its lifeless body collapsing beside her. Harrow stood in the distance, his rifle smoking, a grim smile on his face. Elena nodded her thanks and scrambled to her feet, sprinting toward cover as the war machine's chassis erupted in a fiery explosion. The shock wave knocked her off her feet, but she didn't care. The machine was down, its lifeless husk collapsing in a heap of twisted metal. The remaining Garvan soldiers hesitated, their formation faltering for the first time. It was a small victory, but it was enough to turn the tide of this skirmish. The squad regrouped, their cheers muted by exhaustion but no less heartfelt. For a brief moment, hope flickered in the smoky ruins. But Elena knew better than to celebrate. The Garvans would adapt, just as they always did. And with each victory, the cost grew higher. As she looked at her squad, at the faces of those who had survived and the empty space where others had fallen, she felt the weight of the war pressing down on her shoulders. The evac was secure, for now. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Garvans would come back, stronger and more determined. And humanity would have to face them again, armed with nothing but their will to survive and a determination the Garvans couldn't understand. Elena stood, brushing the dust from her face, and motioned for her squad to move out. There was no time to rest. The war had only just begun. The sky above the battlefield was a swirling tapestry of smoke and fire, the once blue horizon now smeared with the scars of war. Elena crouched behind a crumbled wall, her heart pounding in time with the distant thunder of explosions. This was it, the final stand. The Garvans had returned, their forces larger and more coordinated than ever before. If humanity couldn't hold the line here, it would all be over. The evac routes were gone, their defenses stretched to the breaking point. There was nowhere else to run. Harrow slid into cover beside her, his face smeared with dirt and exhaustion. He held a makeshift map of the area, its edges burned and frayed. "They're closing in from the south," he said, his voice tight. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before they're on us." Elena nodded, her mind racing. She glanced around at the others. What was left of them? Phillips was tending to a wounded fighter, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he applied pressure to a bleeding wound. A handful of other survivors huddled in the shadows, their faces pale but determined. They had no illusions about their chances. This wasn't about victory anymore. It was about buying time. From the ruins beyond their position came the low, mechanical hum of the Garvan war machines. Their presence was oppressive, a constant reminder of the enemy's superiority. Elena tightened her grip on her weapon, her knuckles white against the worn metal. She couldn't show fear. Not now. Not when everyone was looking to her for answers. "Get the charges ready," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "We hit them hard, and we hold this position as long as we can." Harrow hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "And then what?" Elena didn't answer. There was no "then what." There was only now. The Garvins arrived with the precision of a storm, their forces sweeping into the ruins like a black tide. The first wave was met with explosions, the charges detonating in a series of deafening blasts that sent debris raining down. Elena's squad opened fire, their makeshift weapons blazing against the advancing enemy. The air was filled with the crackle of energy blasts and the sharp cries of the wounded. Elena moved like a shadow through the chaos, shouting orders and firing at anything that moved. The Garvins were relentless, their formations tightening even as their numbers thinned. They adapted quickly, finding weak points in the human defenses and exploiting them with brutal efficiency. For every enemy they took down, it seemed two more appeared to take their place. But humanity was relentless too. Elena saw it in the way her squad fought, their resolve unshaken despite the overwhelming odds. Harrow was everywhere at once, laying down suppressive fire and dragging the injured to safety. Phillips charged headlong into the fray, his massive frame a living barricade against the advancing Garvins. Even the wounded fought back, their determination burning brighter than the fires around them. It wasn't enough. The Garvins were closing in, their war machines tearing through the last of the defenses. Elena's heart sank as she realized the line was breaking. She had done everything she could, but it wasn't going to be enough. And then, something changed. From the north came a sound that stopped both sides in their tracks, a low, resonant hum that grew steadily louder. Elena turned, her breath catching as she saw them. Ships. Dozens of them. Alien vessels, their designs unfamiliar but unmistakably advanced. They descended like a flock of predatory birds, their weapons lighting up the battlefield with brilliant bursts of energy. The Garvins hesitated, their formations faltering as the new arrivals joined the fight. Elena stared in disbelief as the alien ships opened fire, their precision devastating the Garvin ranks. The tide of the battle shifted in an instant, the relentless advance of the enemy brought to a screeching halt. One of the alien ships landed nearby, its sleek frame hissing as it touched down. The hatch opened, and from within emerged a figure unlike any Elena had ever seen. Tall and lean, with shimmering silver skin and eyes like molten gold, the alien approached her with a calm, measured stride. "We heard your call," the alien said, its voice resonant and strangely melodic. "We are the Dravik, and we stand with you." Elena blinked, struggling to process what she was hearing. The Dravik. She had heard rumors of them, an ancient race that had avoided the Garvins for centuries, their advanced technology making them untouchable. And now they were here, fighting alongside humanity. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice hoarse. The Dravik's gaze was steady. "Because you showed us what we had forgotten, that even the smallest flame can burn brightly enough to drive back the darkness." Elena didn't have time to respond. The Garvins, recovering from their shock, launched a counterattack. But the combined forces of humanity and the Dravik were ready. The battlefield became a storm of light and sound, the Garvins' relentless efficiency clashing with the chaotic ingenuity of their opponents. Elena fought with renewed vigor, her weapon an extension of her will. She saw Harrow and Phillips rallying the others, their voices rising above the noise as they coordinated with the Dravik. For the first time, it felt like they had a chance. The battle raged on, each moment stretching into eternity. But slowly, surely, the Garvins began to falter. Their forces were dwindling, their war machines falling one by one. And then, finally, the retreat order came. The Garvins pulled back, their ships disappearing into the smoke-filled sky. Elena collapsed against a wall, her body trembling with exhaustion. The battlefield was quiet now, save for the crackle of distant fires. Around her, the survivors began to cheer, their voices rising in a chorus of relief and triumph. The Dravik leader approached her again, its golden eyes softening. "This is not the end," it said. The Gravins will return, and they will be stronger. But so will you. Elena nodded, her chest tightening with a mixture of hope and dread. She looked at the faces of her squad, at the ragged survivors who had given everything to hold the line. They were battered and broken, but they were alive. And as long as they were alive, there was hope. For the first time in weeks, Elena allowed herself to breathe. The war was far from over, but today they had won. And that was enough.